I'm 30 and hadn't faced my family in 5 years. At my cousin's wedding, my older brother laughed, took a slow sip of wine, and sneered, "You still cleaning toilets for a living?" Imagine being told by your own brother that you're an extra puzzle piece that didn't fit in your family, right before he tries to cut you out of your inheritance. But what if that quiet, overlooked brother had been building an empire in secret, and was about to unleash a storm of truth at the most public family gathering possible? My name's Carter, and I'm 30 years old. I haven't seen most of my family in 5 years. Give or take a few ignored text messages and awkward Facebook tags. The last real interaction I had with them was a Thanksgiving dinner where my older brother, Brandon, asked if I could hurry up and clear the dishes because the grown-ups were talking. I was 25, had a college degree, held down 2 part-time jobs while freelancing on the side. And yet, in his eyes, and my parents', I was still the kid who never lived up to his potential. I didn't argue. I just quietly dried my hands on a dish towel and walked out without saying goodbye. There's something strange about growing up in a family where the hierarchy feels permanently locked in. Brandon, the eldest by 7 years, was always the golden boy. Quarterback in high school, on a roll, got a job straight out of college with some tech firm in the city. You know the type, wore blazers to family dinners, bragged about his stock portfolio before the turkey was even carved, and gave everyone unsolicited advice while chewing loudly and sipping Merlot like he invented it. And then there was me. The artsy one. The dreamer. My dad used to joke that I'd end up painting murals on alleyway dumpsters for a living. My mom didn't laugh, but she didn't exactly defend me either. I'll be honest, my 20s were rough. I didn't make it fresh out of college like Brandon did. I tried my hand at a bunch of things, freelance design gigs, app development, even started a blog that made $0, but got a few angry comments, which felt like something. I rented a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and shared walls so thin I could hear my neighbor cough in his sleep. I worked as a janitor at a co-working space during the day and taught myself code at night. Nobody in my family asked how I was doing. And when I reached out once, just once, to ask for a small loan to help cover emergency dental work, my mom responded with a photo of Brandon's new Audi and said, "Maybe your brother can inspire you to get serious." So yeah, I disappeared. Not in a dramatic, block everyone way. I just stopped reaching out. I stopped showing up. I stopped trying. I focused on me. I kept working. I kept learning. I started building something. Slowly. Clumsily. But it was mine. I founded a small SaaS company out of my apartment. I made mistakes, hired the wrong people, wrote bad code, spent weeks debugging something that turned out to be a missing semicolon. But it started growing. A client turned into 5 into 20. I reinvested every cent for the first 2 years. Barely left the apartment. Ate cheap frozen meals and wore the same 2 hoodies on rotation. I didn't feel successful, but I felt focused. I felt awake. And then one day, a bigger company reached out. They wanted to license part of my product. The offer was generous. I took it. Suddenly, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. I moved into a better place. Bought a car that didn't make clicking noises every time I turned left. Hired a real team. Got an accountant. Learned how to sleep more than 4 hours a night. I didn't become a billionaire or anything, but I was finally comfortable. And I did it without a single dime from anyone in my family. That felt good. Really good. That brings us to last month. I got a text from my cousin Grace out of nowhere. She said she was getting married and wanted me there. I stared at the message for a long time. Grace was one of the few people who never looked at me like I was a failure. She used to sneak me snacks during family parties when I'd hide in the garage to avoid Brandon's taunts. So, I said yes. I figured enough time had passed. Maybe things would be different. Maybe I'd show up, we'd share a few awkward hugs, and I'd slip out early, unnoticed. The wedding was in this huge estate just outside the city. Vine-covered arches, white chairs on perfectly manicured grass, a string quartet warming up under a canopy. Everyone was dressed like it was the Oscars. I wore a simple navy suit and brought my assistant, Leah, as my +1. Not because I needed the company, but because she was better at dealing with awkward social interactions than I was. The ceremony was beautiful, genuinely. Grace looked radiant. Her husband seemed kind. I was seated near the back, close enough to see, far enough to blend in. I thought I'd made it through undetected until, during the reception, I heard a familiar voice call out behind me. Well, if it isn't our little Picasso. I turned around slowly. Brandon, of course. He looked the same, just a little more tired around the eyes. Still fit. Still smug. He had a glass of red wine in one hand and a smirk in the other. He gave me that older brother nod that somehow managed to be both dismissive and fake friendly. Didn't think you'd show, he said. Thought you were off in, what was it? Toilet cleaning school? I laughed, mostly to buy time. Something like that. Leah narrowed her eyes at him, but I gave her a subtle shake of the head. I didn't want to start anything. Not here. Not now. Not with the clinking of champagne glasses and soft jazz in the background. But Brandon wasn't done. He sipped his wine, leaned in just enough for only me to hear, and said, "So, what are you doing these days, really? Still chasing that little pipe dream of yours? Still sleeping on a futon and calling it a lifestyle?" I could feel the old anger rising in my chest. That familiar tightness, the part of me that wanted to shout, to defend myself, to list every single achievement, every late night, every dollar I earned without help. But I didn't. I just smiled, and that's when I reached into my pocket and pressed the unlock button on my key fob. The Aston Martin parked across the lawn gave a subtle chirp, headlights blinking twice. Brandon turned his head, confused. Then back to me. "Nah," I said casually. "I mostly travel now. My company pays me even when I sleep." His face changed slightly. That flicker of surprise, of doubt, like he suddenly realized the game had changed and he hadn't been keeping score. But that was just the first crack. Because the night wasn't over. And Brandon wasn't done trying to tear me down. He never could stand not being the center of the room. And I was about to find out just how far he'd go to try and shove me back into the shadows. The rest of that night felt like a slow return to a war zone I thought I'd long since escaped. After the key fob moment, Brandon didn't say anything right away. He just gave this tight smile, like he was holding back a quip he couldn't figure out how to phrase. He clinked glasses with someone nearby and slipped back into the crowd. But I knew that wasn't the end. Brandon never liked being surprised, especially not in public, and I had just embarrassed him without even trying. Leah leaned in and whispered, "Is that the brother?" "Yeah," I said. "I can see it," she replied, her tone dry. "Smells like insecurity and expensive cologne." I almost laughed, but my stomach was too tight. The rest of the night was a slow, awkward blur of mingling. People I'd barely recognized shook my hand, said things like, "Wow, it's been forever," or "You look good," without even knowing what they were saying. A few relatives asked the dreaded question, "So, what do you do now?" I gave vague answers. Nothing flashy, nothing that felt like bragging. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to enjoy Grace's wedding, maybe catch up with her a bit before leaving. But Brandon had other plans. By the time dinner was served, I was seated at table 7, next to the bathrooms, naturally. While Brandon held court at the center table with my parents, his wife Chelsea, and half the cousins I barely remembered. I didn't mind. I was actually grateful for the distance. Leah and I made small talk with a few of the other tablemates, a quiet older couple from the bride's side, and some guy named Kyle who claimed to be a consultant, which I'm pretty sure meant unemployed. Things stayed quiet until the champagne toast started. Grace's dad went first. A sweet, if slightly awkward speech. Then the maid of honor. Then the best man, Brandon. I felt Leah tense beside me as soon as he walked up to the mic. "Oh no," she muttered. Brandon tapped the glass for attention and smiled his signature charismatic smile. "For those who don't know me," he began, "I'm Brandon, the bride's favorite cousin. Don't tell the others." Light laughter. And of course, the proud big brother of one Carter Sullivan, who decided to grace us with his presence after 5 years of radio silence. More laughter. Nervous this time. I felt every eye shift toward me. I gave a tight smile and didn't move. Leah reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Brandon went on, "You know, growing up, I always felt like Carter had his head in the clouds. I mean, while I was applying to colleges, he was painting frogs. Was it frogs or, no, lizards? Definitely lizards." He chuckled, waiting for the room to follow. I didn't laugh. Neither did Leah. The older couple looked mortified. "I used to worry about him," Brandon continued. "But then I realized some people are just built different. Not everyone's meant for the real world. Some people chase dreams, others pay bills. And hey, we need dreamers, too, right?" He raised his glass to dreamers. The toast ended. People clapped. A few glanced at me, unsure of how to react. Grace looked furious, but she couldn't do anything. Not in that moment. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just swallowed it. Every word. Every cheap shot. Every condescending smile. I had promised myself I wouldn't give Brandon the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. But that wasn't the breaking point. No, that came later. After the dinner and the toasts, after most of the older guests had started filtering out and the younger crowd had migrated to the open bar and dance floor, I stepped outside for some air. Leah stayed behind to chat with Grace. I needed a moment alone. The estate grounds were massive, stone paths, lanterns lining the walkways, soft music playing from hidden speakers. I followed the path around the back of the venue, found a quiet bench near a row of hedges, and just sat there, breathing, recentering. That's when I heard footsteps. Didn't mean to upset you, Brandon said, casually rounding the hedge like he just happened to find me. It was just a joke. I didn't respond. You've gotten sensitive, he added. You used to take my jabs better. I looked up. I'm not upset. Good, he said, plopping down on the bench beside me without asking. Because I've been meaning to talk to you anyway. I raised an eyebrow. About what? He shifted, turned toward me. Look, I know we've had our differences, and I know you've got your little company now, or whatever, but the thing is, Mom and Dad are getting older, and there's been some talk. Talk? I asked slowly. He nodded. About the house, the lake property, the inheritance. You know how it is. And they just want to make sure things go smoothly. I felt something cold settle in my gut. Go smoothly. How? Brandon smiled. That same patronizing smile he used when we were kids. They want someone responsible in charge. Someone who understands how to handle assets. You've been gone, out of the loop. I've been helping with taxes, insurance, repairs, you name it. I stood up. So what? They're cutting me out? No one's saying that, he said, standing too. But you know how they see it. You dropped off the map for half a decade. No calls, no visits, no birthdays. Because they made it clear I wasn't welcome. I snapped. He held up his hands. I'm just the messenger, man. I'm trying to be reasonable. I turned to leave, and that's when he said it. I mean, let's be honest, Carter. You were never really part of the plan anyway. I stopped walking. Mom used to say you were like an extra puzzle piece that didn't fit. She didn't mean it cruelly, just realistically. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My hands were shaking. Anyway, he continued, no hard feelings. It's just family stuff. You get it? He walked away after that. I stood there, staring at nothing. Heart pounding. That was the moment, the snap. Not just the insult, but the realization that he meant it. That they all meant it. I had spent 5 years trying to make peace with being the outsider. I told myself I didn't care. That their opinions didn't matter. That building my life without them was a win. But hearing it out loud like that from my own brother turned something inside me. That wasn't just exclusion. That was betrayal. And it was just the beginning. Because what Brandon didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had something they didn't. I had leverage. And I was done playing the quiet brother. When I got back to the reception hall, something in me had gone quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace. No, this was the kind that comes when your body hasn't caught up to your anger yet. Like your brain puts a sheet over the fire so nobody sees the flames underneath. Leah looked up from her seat near the bar and gave me a concerned nod. She didn't ask anything. She just placed her phone down, handed me a glass of water, and waited. I'm good, I said. Lie. The music had shifted to some upbeat pop remix, and drunk uncles were doing the cha slide, like their knees hadn't seen a doctor in 20 years. I watched it like it was a memory from someone else's life. Grace spotted me across the room and jogged over in heels. Hey, where have you been? Everyone's asking where the hot guy with the Aston Martin went. I forced a smile. Just went for a walk. Her face softened. She always saw through me, even when we were kids. Brandon, she started. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She sighed and shook her head. I'm sorry. I didn't know he was going to. It's fine, I cut in. It's your night. Don't let him ruin it. She squeezed my arm. I'm glad you came. For what it's worth, some people do notice. You're not invisible. Then she disappeared back into the crowd. I didn't stay much longer after that. Told Leah I needed to go. She didn't argue. On the ride home, I drove in silence while she scrolled through her phone. About halfway to the hotel, she finally said, you know, it's okay if you're not okay. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I mean it, she added. You don't always have to act like everything rolls off you. I nodded. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could think about was extra puzzle piece. That line wouldn't stop looping in my head. The next few weeks were numb. Back at the office, I was supposed to be prepping for a big product launch. We had just secured a major client in Europe and were pushing to meet Q4 deadlines. The team was pumped. The momentum was real. And yet, I couldn't focus. I'd stare at lines of code and forget what I was debugging, miss meetings, snap at Leo for no reason, then apologize 5 minutes later. The truth was, Brandon had done more damage than I'd let on. Because it wasn't just the wedding. It wasn't just the speech or the dig about my company or the inheritance or even the extra puzzle piece remark. It was the realization that no matter how much I changed, no matter what I built, they'd already decided who I was years ago. And nothing, not success, not distance, not even silence, would change their perception of me. That broke something in me. I started waking up late, missing the gym, eating like crap, snapping at the wrong people. I cancelled 2 investor calls, pushed back our launch by 3 weeks, and let emails pile up until Leah finally barged into my office and slammed her laptop shut. "You either deal with whatever's going on or you tell us you're taking a break," she said. "But this half-zombie version of you is dragging everyone down." That hit me hard because she was right. And worse, the last time I'd felt like this, I was cleaning toilets. I was skipping meals to pay rent. I was questioning whether I even had a future. And here I was again, sitting in a multi-million-dollar startup office with a staff of 12 and a year's runway in the bank, feeling like a complete imposter. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the office and just sat, staring out the window at the city lights, wondering what the hell was wrong with me. Around midnight, I found myself digging through old email folders, stuff from back when the company was just an idea in a Google document. I found the first invoice I ever sent, $50 for a custom widget. The first rejection email I ever got, 3 words, "not a fit." The first reply from a stranger who said, "Hey, I love what you're building." And for some reason, that last one got me. I remembered that night. I'd been eating instant ramen soup, watching YouTube tutorials on app architecture, thinking about giving up. And then that email landed in my inbox like a spark. It reminded me that someone, somewhere, saw me, believed in me, even if it was just a stranger on the internet. I stayed up until 3 a.m., rereading old notes, user feedback, blog comments, even typos, and pitch decks. I reconnected with something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Not revenge. Not proving people wrong. Not trying to outshine my brother. Just building something that mattered. The next day, I called an all-hands meeting, told the team we were done dragging, that we were launching on time, with or without perfect polish, that we'd tighten the UI in V2, but for now, we needed to ship. I apologized to everyone, to Leah especially. I admitted I'd let personal stuff bleed into work, that I'd been checked out, and that it wouldn't happen again. You'd think people would be skeptical after a speech like that, but something changed. Maybe they saw the fire in my eyes again, or maybe they'd just been waiting for someone to call the momentum back. Whatever it was, we snapped back. 3 weeks later, we launched, and it was a hit. The European client brought in 2 more referrals. One of our tools got picked up by a mid-size marketing firm in Toronto. Then someone on TikTok made a viral video about how our app completely changed their workflow. Subscriptions tripled in 2 days. I finally let myself smile again. Genuinely. We threw a small party in the office. Nothing wild, just pizza, soda, and some terrible karaoke. But I stood there watching my team sing horribly off-key and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Not because of a last name. Not because I sat at some family table. But because I'd built something from the dirt up, and people chose to be part of it. I didn't need validation from Brandon. I didn't need a toast or a seat at the center table. I had my own damn table. But even with that clarity, I couldn't lie to myself. The betrayal still lingered. My parents hadn't reached out after the wedding. Not even a text to ask if I made it home okay. And then one day, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a draft of the updated family trust. Brandon had been named sole executive. There was no mention of me, not even a footnote. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it, placed it in a drawer, and locked it. Not because I was letting it go, but because I wasn't going to let them decide what came next. They wanted to write me out of the story. Fine. Let's see how they feel when the story starts to write them out, too. I didn't open that drawer for 6 weeks. Not because I forgot it was there, but because I didn't. I could feel the weight of that folded paper in the back of my mind every single day. Like a splinter lodged too deep to dig out, but too annoying to ignore. I went back to work, business as usual. I led meetings. I traveled. I expanded the company's infrastructure. We launched new features, hired 2 new devs, and began talks with an angel investor who'd previously backed 2 unicorns. Outwardly, I was thriving. Probably at the highest point in my life so far. But inside, the old tension hummed like background noise. Always there, always low and steady. Because that envelope had made one thing clear. They weren't just ignoring me anymore. They were erasing me. That's when I realized something. I didn't need their approval. I didn't want it. But I would not let them take away my name like I was a typo in their narrative. If they wanted to play legacy chess, I had a few moves of my own. But first, I needed information. So, I made a call. Her name was Adrienne Grant. She was a corporate attorney who had helped me with a contract dispute a year ago. Ruthless, meticulous, and extremely discreet. I'm not suing anyone, I said after we caught up briefly. I just want to know what I'm looking at. Quietly, I faxed her a copy of the draft trust. Less than 48 hours later, she called me. I'll keep it simple, she said. You're not disinherited, technically. You're just not mentioned at all. Which means what, exactly? It means if your parents pass without revising the document, everything goes to Brandon as sole executive unless a court challenge is filed. And even then, it'll be uphill. I stared at the floor of my office. Can I find out when this draft was made? 6 months ago. It's notarized. That stung. 6 months ago, I just landed our first international licensing deal. I was working 14-hour days building something real. And while I was doing that, they were quietly removing me from the table like I'd never existed. Anything I can do? I asked. She paused. Well, not legally, unless there's coercion, mental incompetence, or fraud involved. But, Carter, her voice softened, which was rare for her. You're not crazy to be upset about this. It's cold and it's calculated. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in silence. Then I pulled the envelope from the drawer. And this time, I didn't just look at it. I studied it. I started remembering little things. Conversations I'd had with my parents over the years that at the time I brushed off as casual comments, but now landed differently. My mom once joked that Brandon was always the planner and that he'd keep the family on track. My dad mentioned during a rare phone call years ago that he was sorting some paperwork with Brandon, just boring estate stuff. They had been laying the groundwork for this long before the ink dried, and they'd done it quietly, strategically, like I was a loose end they didn't want to tie up, but couldn't bear to cut out completely. That's when something clicked. They hadn't written me out because I failed. They wrote me out because I succeeded without them. Because I was the reminder they couldn't control, mold, or manipulate anymore. So, I stopped asking why they did it. And I started asking what I could do next. The first thing I did was hire a private researcher. Not a sketchy PI from a strip mall. A real one. Former IRS consultant turned corporate digger. His name was Vernon. Tall, soft-spoken, and methodical. I'm not looking to blackmail anyone, I told him. But I want to know what Brandon's really doing with the family money. Because if he'd been made executive, and he was handling the taxes and repairs as he claimed at the wedding, there had to be a paper trail. 3 weeks later, Vernon came back with a stack of documentation. Let's just say Brandon was not the responsible family steward he pretended to be. For starters, he had quietly transferred the lake house deed into a shell LLC registered in Nevada. The LLC owned by another holding company, which, you guessed it, Brandon also controlled. On paper, it was a common estate move, but it meant the property no longer technically belonged to our parents. It belonged to him. That alone could trigger serious implications if challenged later. Then there were the maintenance expenses. $9,000 for dock repair, $3,200 for landscaping upgrades, and an eye-popping $18,500 tagged as furnishing replacements. Except the receipts were vague, the vendors were real, but Vernon traced 2 of them back to side businesses owned by Brandon's friends. He was laundering family assets to enrich himself. But the most interesting piece was buried in a scanned email attachment Vernon had intercepted through an old domain connected to Brandon's business. It was a message between Brandon and his accountant. The subject line, Tax Shield Strategy, Parental Asset Transfer. The body detailed a plan to gradually move my parents' remaining liquid assets into long-term tax-sheltered accounts under Brandon's authority to protect the estate, but it also made clear that Brandon was building structures that would eventually exclude me completely by locking the assets into entities I'd have no access to or legal standing in. I stared at the email for a long time. My brother wasn't just playing favorites, he was playing God, and I finally had proof. I met with Adrian again and showed her everything. Legally, this gives you a foundation, she said. It's not slam dunk stuff, but if your parents were unaware of how far Brandon was going, or if they die without a full audit, this could crack the door wide open. What would you do? I asked. She leaned back in her chair. If I were you, I'd gather leverage and wait. Wait for what? For the moment he thinks is untouchable. So that's what I did. I didn't go nuclear. I didn't confront my parents or Brandon. I didn't send cryptic texts or make dramatic visits. I went quiet, focused on work, waited. But I did start planting seeds. I reached out to my cousin Grace, the bride, and asked if she remembered any weird interactions with Brandon about family finances. She hesitated at first, but eventually admitted he had tried to get her to sign something related to a shared family cabin trust a few months before her wedding. She didn't sign it, but he pressured her hard. I asked her to forward me anything she still had. She did. Then I reached out to my aunt, my mom's sister, under the pretense of checking in after a recent minor surgery. We hadn't spoken in years, but she warmed up quickly. Eventually, I asked her if she knew who was handling my parents' financial stuff. Oh, Brandon's got all of that locked down, she said with a note of disapproval. Your father practically treats him like a CPA now. I'm surprised your name isn't in the will. Honestly, it's not, I said softly. She went silent. Then, that's not right, Carter. I didn't press further, but I knew she'd remember that. I didn't need to blow everything up. I just needed to turn the tide. And to do that, I had to put Brandon exactly where he wanted to be, at the center of everything. So, I RSVP'd to the next family gathering, a retirement party for my father. Brandon was hosting it at the lake house, the same one he no longer technically let our parents own. And I knew deep in my gut that he'd use that night to flaunt his role, his control, his crown, which was exactly what I needed. Because when he stepped up in front of the family to claim the throne he thought he'd secured, I was going to be ready with a smile, a flash drive, and a very simple sentence. Before we start the speeches, I thought I'd show everyone something interesting I found. But that's not where the story ends, because Brandon was about to do something that would make everything worse. And he had no idea he was walking straight into it. That day, I arrived late on purpose. The sun had just begun to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the lake as I pulled up to the driveway of the old family cabin, now technically a corporate asset in Brandon's shell company. I parked 2 houses down and walked the rest of the way with calm, measured steps. No flashy car this time, no assistant, just me, wearing a black blazer and a steel grey button-down, holding a simple envelope in one hand and a USB drive in the other. I could already hear the familiar voices as I approached. Laughs that felt like echoes from a past life. Music filtering through outdoor speakers, and the clink of glasses from people who once couldn't be bothered to remember my birthday. I wasn't here for reconciliation. I was here for clarity. The backyard had been set up like a catered vineyard tasting. White tent, linen-covered tables, and those fake wooden barrels people rent for ambience. My dad stood in the center of a circle of family members, wearing a button-down golf shirt tucked too tightly into khakis, laughing as Brandon delivered yet another speech into a wireless mic, and I think we can all agree, Brandon said, swirling a glass of wine like he'd studied it on YouTube, that Dad's leadership, both at work and at home, was what kept this family on the rails. And now, as he retires, it's time to pass the torch. Not just of property or assets or responsibility, but of legacy. He looked down at my dad, who nodded proudly, eyes glinting with admiration. Then Brandon's gaze swept across the crowd and landed on me. He froze just for a second, but it was enough. I stepped forward as the last polite chuckles faded. Every pair of eyes turned in my direction. My mom's smile twitched, confused. My dad tilted his head. Grace, standing near the wine table, gave me a slight nod. I stopped a few feet from Brandon and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Before we move on, I said, pulling the flash drive from my pocket. I brought something to show the family. Thought it might be relevant to Dad's retirement and to the legacy Brandon just mentioned. Brandon's smile thinned. Now's really not but I had already walked over to the media table where a projector was plugged into a laptop for the evening slideshow. Without asking, I slid the USB in. Leah had prepped the presentation for me. She didn't ask many questions, just trusted that I had my reasons. The screen behind the tent flickered to life. I clicked to the first slide, deed transfer, lake house property. It was a scanned document with Brandon's digital signature, the transfer from my parents' names into the LLC. My dad frowned. My mom leaned forward. I clicked again. Vendor invoices 2023. A table showing tens of thousands of dollars paid to vendors for maintenance and repairs. All connected to Brandon's business partners or personal friends. Some even listed Brandon's name in the approved by section. Someone murmured. My aunt gasped. Brandon stepped forward, his voice a little too loud. This is ridiculous. Out of context. Those were authorized repairs. Dad asked me to manage this stuff. I clicked again. Email from Brandon to accountant. Subject, tax shield strategy. I let the room read it. No commentary. Just silence. Then I turned to my parents. Did you know the lake house no longer belongs to you? I asked my father, calm as ever. Did you know your retirement assets are being parked in a trust you don't control? My dad opened his mouth then closed it. I thought, he stammered. Brandon said he was helping us protect it, that it was safer in his hands. Brandon's voice rose. And it is. It's a legal asset shield, Dad. This is all standard financial planning. He's twisting it. I looked at Brandon for the first time. Really looked at him. And for the first time, he looked nervous. Not angry, not smug, just exposed. I didn't twist anything, I said. I just followed the paperwork like a responsible partner might do if you were included in the planning, but I wasn't. And I'm okay with that now. I don't need the money. I turned back to the crowd, but I'm not okay with this. With manipulation. With deception. With watching my parents get quietly written out of their own legacy while Brandon plays family king with a glass of Merlot. Nobody laughed. Then I walked over to my dad, opened the envelope in my hand, and handed him a packet of papers. What's this? He asked. A detailed breakdown, I said. Of every transfer Brandon authorized, every account moved, every payment processed, and who benefited from it. My mom's hands trembled as she took the top sheet. My father, ever the quiet one in a crisis, looked slowly from me to Brandon and then to the documents. This can't be right, he whispered. I shrugged. You've got a lawyer, so do I run it by both? Brandon laughed. A short, dry bark. You're just bitter. This is revenge because no one took you seriously. Because you disappeared for 5 years and came back thinking you could rewrite the rules. He took a step closer. You think money makes you legitimate? You think building some app and driving a fancy car means you're part of this family again? I didn't flinch. I never stopped being part of this family, Brandon. You just spent so long trying to make me invisible, you forgot I was still watching. More murmurs. Someone behind me whispered, he forged that LLC under his own name. And then my mother, quiet, always passive, stepped forward. Is it true? She asked Brandon directly. Did you move the house into your company? Mom, answer me. Brandon hesitated. Just for a second, but it was long enough. Yes, he said finally. She slapped him. The sound cracked like thunder in the stunned silence. Not hard, not violent, but with enough sting to silence the entire backyard. You took advantage of us, she whispered. Of your father's trust. Of mine. You weren't protecting us. You were protecting yourself. I was trying to secure. For you, she snapped. Not for us. And not for Carter. Brandon looked around. The crowd had shifted. His allies were quiet. The cousins, the uncles, even his own wife. They weren't looking at him the same way anymore. His kingdom had cracked, and I hadn't even raised my voice. I leaned in slightly and said just loud enough for him to hear, you built your empire on lies, Brandon. I just showed them the blueprint. The fallout was quiet at first. My parents didn't call me that night. Neither did Brandon. I drove home alone, parked the car in my garage, and just sat there for a long time. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clean, like I'd finally rinsed off the last layer of old guilt I'd been carrying since I was a teenager. Like I could finally breathe without wondering what version of me the family had chosen to believe in this year. 3 days later, my dad asked me to meet him for coffee. He didn't say much at first, just ordered black coffee, stared at the lid for a long time, and finally said, I was wrong about you. I didn't say anything, just waited. He nodded slowly. About a lot of things. I let Brandon take control because I thought he knew what he was doing. I thought you didn't. He took a deep breath. I think I believed what was easier to believe. That hit harder than I expected. He handed me an envelope. This one thinner. No flash drives, no bombshells, just a letter from the lawyer updating the family trust. Brandon was out, and I was named co-executive alongside a third-party legal representative. They weren't giving me everything, but they were giving me a seat at the table again. And this time, I'd built my own chair. As for Brandon, I heard through Grace that he tried to deny everything, claimed it was all a misunderstanding. But by then, the family had seen too much. My parents called for a full audit. The lawyer reviewed every transfer. His shell companies unraveled faster than he could respond. He ended up dissolving one of his firms under quiet pressure. He still got money. He'll be fine. But the respect? Gone. And in this family, that's the real currency. A few months later, I hosted a dinner at my place. Nothing extravagant, just a few close friends, some new ones, and Leah, who made a toast at the end. To Carter, she said, raising her glass. The guy who turned silence into strategy and made revenge look like art. I laughed for real that night. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived. I'd walked into a room full of people who once saw me as invisible and left with every pair of eyes watching me walk out. Not as the extra puzzle piece, but as the one who finished the picture. And this time, I'm not leaving the table. What do you think? Was I too harsh on Brandon, or did he finally get what he deserved? Have you ever had to expose someone in your family for their deceit? Tell me your story in the comments below.